Welcome back to Perspectives with Asima Silva. So yes, we do have Dr. Bill Slaughter joining us, and we would like to thank him to continue the conversation that we were having last week on police brutality. And it stemmed up from the George Floyd incident. So last week we did a big introduction on the type of training our police departments are getting in this nation, where are they getting it from, what kind of training it is, and starting to ask questions of when is it terrorism, when is it crowd control, and when should it be applied. But today we're going to talk about it on the local sense. And I welcome you again, and thank you so much for joining us and spending more time with us. I know this is a topic that really should be talked about, and very few people are talking about it this deeply. And this is the point of this show, is to share perspectives and really dive into those topics that maybe other people aren't diving into as deep as we want them to.
Yeah. Well, again, Asima, just the platform that you provide, all the time here, I think does such a great service to the community. We were talking about taking things a little bit further, including kind of local examples. Before focusing on Massachusetts, I just want to take that idea of us in the U.S. and the problems we have here, just to underline that again. Now, we have a number of hypercharged kind of issues that this is all within. Racial issues, bias issues, long history of, anti-Semitism in the U.S., anti-Jewish anti-Semitism, anti-Arab, that kind of thing. There's been huge contributions from coalitions of people in the U.S. That has moved the U.S. further forward at critical times. I think of big contributions in the 1960s to, kind of the rainbow of all people working on things, certainly led by Black community with I think the highest degree of suffering and oppression there for the longest time, but other people helping as well. In 1964, there was an infamous murder of 3 young civil rights workers in the South. Philadelphia was the name of the town, buried in a mud dam. 2 of the workers there were Jewish, Michael Schwerner and let's see, Goodwin and Schwerner were. There's a young Black man named Cheney that were there as well, just showing kind of cross work there. That's the background that we have to keep emphasizing, and I think that's happening locally as well here, because a lot of the concerns here are, how to support right now the big focus on Black oppression, Black Lives Matter, do that, and by everybody, and bring together more people. One of the things I'm excited about, I was saying when we had time last time about old Vietnam memories, there's been a big change now. I see a lot of more rainbow coalition, even stronger now, of who's marching, what color of people are marching, all that kind of thing. So that's real important. So locally here, I did one little analysis with the documents I could get a hold of some of those tours to the Israel-Palestine area of the from 2015 to 2018, and it was this particular thing were some lists of groups that had taken part in that. There were about 22 states represented, in DC as well, about 7 federal agencies. But the big majority was local, so a lot of counties and especially municipal police departments and some others. For Massachusetts particularly, and again, I'm not sure about all of these. Well, I did list these off before, so that's a lot of local participation there. Let me jump to then the local response here. One of the most exciting examples here locally was up in Vermont, where the Vermont State Police in 2018 pulled out of participation in the trip that they'd been signed up for, when a citizens group there, again across different communities, really brought that to light and asked, does this really make sense? They decided not to. Here in Massachusetts, the one group that pulled out, my understanding is, again, at about that same time, 2018, was out in Northampton. So there are some real local examples of how to do that. And I would say that that's been escalating more. I mentioned 2017 in North Carolina, and then 18 here, as I'm mentioning, and then the work in Atlanta recently. So those are all kind of good things. One of the challenges is how to get information on this. A lot will come to light afterwards, like I'm saying, when some of the local police departments in that are kind of reporting out or reporting back to the public about their trip. There's so many different organizations that could be enlisted in these that it's hard for just volunteers and that like myself to put out enough requests for information, the public information process and that to learn about that. What I did find in trying to do that some with one of the universities here, public university in Massachusetts, was I was rebuffed initially. Well, you have to do it this way. What exactly are you looking for? And with that one, I am ashamed to say that I let that drop. I had other things going on. I didn't pursue that further. So one thing that can be helpful is to try to work in coalition with anybody else who wants information about that. Some police departments will be forthcoming. There was a local, relatively small police department between Worcester here and the Boston area, where the police chief came back and had a kind of report out publicly. So some of us went to that. There were probably 20 people or so that went and listened to what he had to say about his trip. And I really appreciated that. It was clear that he hadn't had that much background about the area, and it was also clear that he picked up a lot of the dominant narrative there, or the group by the dominant ethnicity there. He drew a map, or had a paper one, I think, and kind of put things in exact terms of how the Israeli government sees basically brown people over there, Arab people, Palestinian, and neighboring people in real negative terms. Now, there is terror over there. There are safety problems. But again, what does terror mean? Like we talked about in the prior show, many of us have probably been involved in some ways. I want to...
But that's concerning what you're saying. He drew things associating in negative terms these people, which means the message that they're coming back with after these trainings or these visits is definitely profiling. And in a negative way. And so we're seeing this kind of emulate in some of these incidences that we see when it goes really horribly wrong, and we see these in these videos, and some of these really do end up in untimely deaths. But why don't people know about this?
Well,
because you're saying a police chief did a presentation about his visit and shared his visit. So it doesn't seem to me that, or maybe I'm mistaken, they're not asked to keep this private. They're not asked to, hide these kind of trainings, which would indicate, or at least I would hope that it indicates, that there is nothing negative or, that is really crucially could be considered negative with these kind of visits. But why aren't some of them sharing? Why don't a lot of people, common people, know that this is the way that these police are being trained and making, being taught on how to profile and view certain ethnicities or darker skinned people?
Well, it's a big world out there, and I certainly don't have all the answers. Just to back up a step, how much of what we do know is, how much more is there? And I don't mean to be paranoid or conspiracy theory about that. I was in the Army in Germany during the Cold War. There was a lot of secret stuff going on there, both ways and that kind of thing. That's happening all the time. Our country is being treated in that way. Our country certainly is treating others. It's quite well known that we upended democracy in Guatemala, Chile, and Iran, and that kind of thing. So of what we're seeing now with this, what else is going on? I don't know. My point with bringing all that up is I don't think it's just one country badly influencing the U.S. and all that. Well, one of the charged issues that this brings up is the long-time anti-Jewish meme of secret control cabals. Long-time European, basically paranoid fantasy about Jewish control that I very much disagree with, about kind of secret control and that kind of thing. So when we say, why is some of this hard to access and all that, it can bleed into some concerns like, or some threads like that, which I think are just flat out racist and anti-Jewish people, which I have zero support of. I have immediate family members who are Jewish. I think all the time of safety. And used to take soldiers on trip to concentration camps to kind of teach them about that when I was in the Army over there. But there's a lot going on. I should say also that the police aspect of this, there are very similar military exchanges as well. Some of the groups that sponsor these have websites that also talk about the Army and Navy and Marines and other folks going. But again, why this? Well, a lot of it maybe there's just a lot going on now. I think that it's likely that there'll be probably some more concern by involved U.S. organizations now with this kind of turn that we hope we're going through away from militarized policing, that kind of thing. There'll probably be less pride that sometimes comes out in public presentations about taking part in that. So it may be that it'll be a little bit harder to get a hold of. And some of it is quite open. Like I say, some of the folks, when they come back, they just call local reporters and say that. So I'm not trying to say it is all.
Yeah,
hidden.
I'm just, the reason why I was asking is because this is like very new to me. I did not even know about this, and most people, I believe, also don't know about it.
Well,
and when we hear things of defund the police or whatever, I'm looking at that going, what does that mean? We need law enforcement. And there's very good police officers out there.
Absolutely.
So I'm confused on what that really means. And so if people actually knew about certain things, maybe the whole concept of defund the police would be a little bit more, I don't know, specified on what that means. Instead of just a blanket statement where I'm confused. What does that mean? I don't understand. We need the law enforcement. We need people to keep us safe. So my question was more towards, maybe this is what, and I don't know for sure, what they mean by defunding the police, not militarizing them, not teaching, our police officers such a negative form of law enforcement and keeping order. So in that sense, is that what they're trying to say? And maybe I don't know. I don't know what their phrase really actually means.
As far as defund the police?
Yeah, and I'm assuming, does this have anything to do with that, is what I'm asking.
Well, I frankly don't know. And this is where I want to be a good ally and supporter of the current push of leadership with Black Lives Matter and focus on African Americans and focus on our problem here with policing. When I hear defund the police, I hear different people saying things about that differently. From full dismantlement, like in Minneapolis, and wherever they're at as a city now. This is being filmed late July, so this is in process of 2020. To other folks saying, well, let's move significant money. In my home area in Seattle, I think the mayor's talking about moving 20% of the police budget or something like that to community services, that kind of thing. So that would be, I think, a great talkback to have some of the leaders here come and talk just directly. I don't mean to speak for anybody else. I do not, never do.
I think it needs to be specified on what that means. Because as you said, there's so many people that have different definitions of what that means. And the way I see it is, why not talk about, these kind of trainings that change them? I mean, I understand officers need to be trained in how to subdue, a person who might, exuberate violent behavior, but maybe, teaching them when to use it, exactly to identify the situations, and also not with this negative profiling, looking it into a little bit more deeper rather than these blanket statements of, the police is bad or defund the police, and it just leaves it to open-ended, interpretations of what all these phrases mean.
Well, I do have some contact with some of the Black Lives Matter folks in Metro Boston. If you
Oh yes, of course. As you know, I'm always open to hearing people's perspectives and their views.
We did make connections about other interviewees.
Yes.
So maybe we can do that.
Yes.
I think it's really important. Just one of the current ideas that I hear talked about is this idea of registering police officers. I work in healthcare. I'm a physician. We have all kinds of scrutiny. We have to go through the background check, criminal background check. We have very tight regulations. It's state to state now, but there's also a kind of national consortium that kind of tracks us. I'm just moving my license from Massachusetts back out to my home state of Washington. So I have to send all kind of documentations and look at a national database. Did I have any infractions in Arkansas or Hawaii, anywhere like that? So this idea of having police who have another degree, another kind, I should say, of real life and death kind of influence, like physicians do in a way, use of deadly force, also having some just flat out registration and different schemas like that. I hear Massachusetts is developing one. I'm not sure where that stands federally. I think that may still be in negotiation, but that's one example of the things that make all kinds of sense to me. So maybe we're getting diverted a little bit, but
Yes, please go back to. I know you had several points that you wanted to share with us.
well, we were talking last time a little bit more about different kinds of training. We were talking about surveillance. We were talking about electronic surveillance from drones and cameras and wiretapping, that kind of thing. Another is kind of human intelligence. So that's undercover officers. That is probably a valid part, I would think, of some policing in that, to get inside real tight organizations that might be concerning. But that's one that's easy to lapse into some of the negative stereotyping and things like that. Apparently, some of the Israeli police and military undercover infiltration, intelligence, if you will, kind of things like that, have been used as models, or at least influence some of the undercover U.S. police activities like that. Again, some of which are probably needed. But there was, like, after 9/11 in some of the Masajid mosques in New York, quite a widespread system like that has had a lot of criticism. There were so-called mosque crawlers who were going through a lot of masajid or the mosque there, and it's been criticized a lot for just some flat-out too simplistic profiling and things like that. One of the challenges with operations like that is, in what ways do undercover officers then sometimes lapse into being false flag or agent provocateur, in my excellent French, provocative provocative agents, doing things that then the overt control forces can say, well, that was those other people, those crowds that are terrorists, and even though it was one of their people undercover doing it, things like that. There's been examples, certainly in the U.S., of sometimes relatively naive young people often being kind of coaxed into saying that they would take part in a bombing or something like that by FBI or other undercover agents, where the situation probably wouldn't have happened at all if there hadn't been that kind of lead kind of suggestions, that kind of thing. Entrapment is a word often used for that. And again, if you're interested in getting more experts on that, I'll certainly work with you.
Yeah, of course,
on that kind
of
of
course.
thing. So that's more the kind of human level, and that's part of what our officers get exposed to. Now, that doesn't mean that our forces here shouldn't use that at all. It doesn't mean that they weren't making that up on their own or doing that. I'm certain that that's been happening. But again, how much is that solidified by seeing other this other organization do that, and how much has it given the spin that crowd control is anti-terrorism and that kind of thing? We are hoping to keep some civil rights here, where we get to have free assembly, where we get to have some free speech and all that. We'll fight to the death for that one. So just want to watch working against that.
Right. And when you said crowd control, I mean, there's been a lot of peaceful protests and peaceful gatherings, especially organized for the Black Lives Matter movement, and officers have been present. And I think in some cases people felt more comfortable with those officers present.
Exactly.
So it's very easy to paint one picture, but I think done correctly, it is used in the correct manner.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I know I continue to identify as white, as male, U.S.-born, privileged, and from my perspective, I'm buoyed by some of the pictures that shows officers walking in rank with Black Lives Matter folks and other leaders like that. I know some people don't see it that way, and that's just one comment. So to me, that's just tremendously positive. But I think it's a general tone that's, just towards militarization overall that's challenging. Now, one way that I see U.S. responsibility, U.S. cultural change, especially, I use the 9/11 attacks as a reference point. I think there's still something to that as a major shift, has been externally with the so-called war on terror, which has very similar dynamics. It's easy for us to say that outside the U.S. when the main killing zone has been in Muslim areas in South Asia, from the Middle East up through Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan and so on. But part of what's happened there is that there's been a huge diversion of funding from more development and civilian approaches. Some of the U.S. Agency for International Development was tried to be done away with. That's a U.S. agency that gave a lot of different agricultural and small business and so on development money that had to be downsized and put in the State Department because some people wanted to take that away. And some other U.S. kind of large S programs. A lot of that funding has been diverted to the military flat out. I was very excited the other day to see an interview with one of the former U.S. Secretary of Defense's, Robert Gates. This is on public broadcasting, it's Googleable, just talking about, I think he used the term hardening since 9/11 of how the U.S. looks externally. Just taking away all the, some people say soft power or American largesse and that kind of thing, but in our mold, yes, trying to do some development worldwide, just the world seeing the U.S. become just a militant, hard power. He put it in terms of, if you only have a hammer, if we only have global military, then everything you're going to see is a nail, and that's what you use. Yeah. You use that hammer. And so to me, that's quite similar with how we've been changed internally here, not by just Israeli influence by any means, but long history of U.S. Kind of racialization of policing and all that, but supported now by this tie that we're talking about as well.
Right.
So, we were just developing more of a sense of internal police being a hammer as well, and seeing crowds as that nail that we know how to handle because our close allies, that are being such an example for us are teaching us what to do.
That's a very good point. You're saying like internationally we've become almost this hammer, and now it's also leaking into our local view of how we treat our own civilians within our country.
Yeah, it's all kind of related. But the good news on that, I think, is that things have become so extreme here, with just more and more video of killings here in the U.S., predominantly of black guys, happening for hundreds of years. But we got those videos now that I hopefully would have at a point of major change. So hopefully that internally, as we move towards, a really more diverse, accepting, and caring country across the ethnic lines. One time I met you down in D.C. at the
Yes.
National Muslim Caucus there, with really coming out of. I don't know, you know more than I do, but a Muslim community is just really stepping up and becoming more involved politically with the presidential candidates who are there
Yes.
personally or on the screen and that kind of thing. As we really move towards real more diversity and acceptance in the U.S., hopefully, that will extend internationally too. Our policy will be coming out of a more diverse community here, well, we will see people globally in different terms. And that'll certainly apply to reversing U.S. policy in Palestine-Israel, back to our values of kind of all created
So
equal.
that leads me into a question that's
Yes,
based
ma'am.
on your profession.
Ah.
So as you're saying that hopefully we'll see policy changes for the better, but how long does it take for humans to really accept it? Not just follow the law because they have to, but then really internalize it. So
Yeah.
it's internalized in the society
Yeah.
and not seen as an issue.
Yeah.
How long does it take?
Will you tolerate me trying that same thing of what do you think first? I do have some thoughts on that.
Well, I'm hoping I'm wrong. I almost feel like it's going to take 2 to 3 generations.
Yeah.
Only because I feel that a lot of people will follow the policy based on if it's in law because
Yeah.
they just want to be law-abiding citizens,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily may agree with
Yeah.
including and welcoming everyone because they still have that little bit of that master-slave mentality.
Yeah.
As much as they want to fight against it, I think it
Yeah.
still lingers.
Yeah.
And it somehow still lingers, I believe, into the next generation. And I think
Yeah.
it takes about, in my opinion, almost 3 generations before we see real change starting to happen. So I'm hoping I'm wrong. So I'm hoping you're going to tell me, no, I'm being pessimistic.
I think I'm with you on that, something like that. I use as reference points being in Germany. That was a real formative time for me. Little odd for a soldier. I lived basically in a student's commune off a base. And talking to the young Germans there about the Holocaust was tremendously important for me, just learning what turn the culture had made after the Second World War in terms of school curriculum and just over a lot of different tone. Like I said, I took some of my colleagues. So some of the young American soldiers came over there one time, some young white guys, and they were starting to say things like, now we get to meet some real Nazis. Things like that just didn't seem right to me. I took a van load of them to the nearby concentration site, Bergen-Belsen, that kind of thing. But the way that Germany has changed so much in really trying to own what it did and all that, in a lot of ways. Now, clearly they have a lot of problems. There's a lot of concern in Germany now, I still keep up good ties there, of infiltration in the police and military, talking about police and military, of real German nationalists, people who would be skinheads and neo-Nazis and stuff like that. So that's still there. But again, I don't think some sense of ethnic chauvinism or I'm the best and that kind of thing will ever go away. There's some of that implicit bias in all of us. But how do we form it? What do we do to control that and watch for that? Now, in Germany recently has been one of the centers when there has been the global really outpouring across countries, across people about the George Floyd follow-up, and it's just one accumulation of so many cases. When I talk to friends, predominantly in Berlin area, there's been massive outpourings, and again, those demonstrations have been much bigger than what we've seen, similar to the US, been much bigger than the far-right demonstrations that Germany is concerned about, and rightly concerned about. I see it as the same as when we see in Charlottesville and so on, some of the far-right groups that are quite scary, then to see now some of the massive outpouring for weeks in the US. I still think that there's a decent center in the US, but how to keep that going. On this change thing, I had a cousin who did some family history. In our family, there have been branches of my family that have been slaveholding, and I've memorized it. One of my great-great-great-grandfathers, 1850 census, Missouri, 2 slaves. One of my four greats, grandfather, 1794 in Virginia, paid a tax because he had 4 slaves. That's generations. You could hear a lot of greats there of social change. How long does it take? I wish I knew exactly. I wish I were a social psychologist who understood that more. But it really takes so many things. Each of us wrestling with our own souls, a lot of school curriculum, which, by the way, in Israel-Palestine is more and more along ethnic divide lines, that kind of thing. We have to all keep at it. So that's one way of saying that. I think for me personally, in the Northwest, in my home state, there's a lot of tribes, there's a lot of presence, more so here than in the Northeast, at least in my view. And just working directly with some folks, I trained at Indian Health Clinic, and like I say, worked with the tribe that whose land I grew up on, basically. And hearing some of the personal stories, we got to keep talking like this, like we're talking about, overt discussion
Sharing
across
stories.
people.
Right. So we are out of time, but what a discussion. And hopefully in the future we can have our guest back again. What we learned today and sharing my perspective is there's a lot to talk about, and we can't just blanketly just make phrases. We need to really think about what that means. And what I see is that we have hope in the future. We don't know how long it might take, but hopefully our policies will change for the better, and we will all have a better world. Thank you for joining us today, and hope you join us again with Perspectives with Asima Silva.